keeping the law that my dad laid down, but completely violating the spirit of it. Keeping the law that my dad laid down by not racing, but violating the whole idea for not racing by not having competition. It was even more fun trying to go slow without my dad catching on. And oftentimes, saints, that's just how we are. We try to keep something so that we... Remember the trip we took to Puerto Rico? Remember Jared Carr? How can you forget Jared Carr? Came to me one day, the Sabbath. He says, Pastor. I said, oh, what, Jared? What? I didn't say that. I said, yes, Jared. I want to go snorkeling on Sabbath. Can I do it? Well, no. Ask Montez. I didn't tell him that. I said, I don't know, Jared, because, you know, and here's what I'm really thinking. What are the parents going to think if they find out I let them? So once again, I'm thinking about who. How are the other sponsors going to view me if I let him? How is this all going to go down? How is it going to reflect on me? I'm not really worried about this kid's question or what he wants to do. I'm worried about me. But he persisted. And I was hoping he'd just go away, but like Jared never did, he didn't go away. He continued to ask the question. But he asked the question with a different twist than I expected. He said, you know something? That my mom and my dad and their friends, they get together on a Sabbath afternoon, after church, and they put on their hiking boots. Okay, good. Jared, where are you going with this? Mind you, I'm just kind of looking at it, hoping he gets through with the story so I can just continue on with my day of supervising the kids. And they put on their hiking boots, they lace them up tight, they get their shorts on, they get their Birds of Western Hemisphere book out, complete with all the pictures. They head out to the nearest state park, they grab their binoculars, and go out hiking around, breaking a sweat, hiking up hills and down hills and around the hills, looking in their bird book. Hey, I got this one. Oh, okay. Hey, I got this one. Okay, so what's wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with that, Pastor Roger. What I'm thinking is that if God created the things that are above the earth as well as those beneath, and my mom and dad put on boots and go hiking around the woods to see it, why can't I put on a pair of flippers and a mask and see what God has created underwater on Sabbath?
Amen.
Get out of here, Jared. You're bothering me now. No, I couldn't say that. I couldn't. I looked at him like, well, because I said so. And of course, that makes no sense at all. And I thought to myself, well, now he makes a point. Hiking boots or flippers? Binoculars or a mask? God's beautiful creation on the outside or God's even more beautiful, often, creation underneath? And I sat there for about 5 minutes knowing full well I was going to come up with an answer that was going to satisfy his little soul and have him walking off knowing he couldn't go snorkeling. But I couldn't. I had been so programmed about do's and don'ts that I had lost sight myself of what God intended the Sabbath to be. Now, if there's a young man who was struggling with his own identity at times, a very funny kid, half the things he did cracked me up, even when he was getting in trouble. I had to stifle a laugh or two. And if he was to put on a mask and some flippers, and swim around with some of the fish that you see there in Puerto Rico and the coral reef, and see God's amazing creation and what the intricacies of how God paints these fish in ways that we can't even imagine. There's not a painter on the face of the earth that can do the handiwork and crafty work that God can do. And perhaps Jared, in seeing what God can do, would think to himself, you know, I don't always do what my dean tells me. I never do what my dean tells me to do. I very rarely do what the authorities tell me to do, but I do know one thing. That God is awesome. And what kind of a lesson could he have learned from that? But Pastor Roger, worried about how others would perceive him, told him no. Even though he had a perfectly valid point. Later on, I walked up to him after we left Puerto Rico and it was no longer an issue. You know, Jared, you were right about that. I should have let you do it. And you know what he told me? You're right, Roger, I was. Not Pastor, you're right, Roger, I was. And walked away. This is how we do. We have in our minds a particular thing based on either our culture, our tradition, our upbringing, our current circumstance that we are comfortable with, but when we scrutinize it through the Spirit's direction, we realize that what we have created is a list of do's and don'ts that have absolutely nothing to do with resting in Jesus and developing the kind of relationship He so desperately wants with us, and now has provided 24 solid hours where we can do it. And I think as we present this Sabbath message to believers and non-believers, we do it from a mindset of do's and don'ts, and not from a relationship we can develop with Jesus. The Ten Commandments. Now these were Jewish people. Book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 20. If I get this one wrong, then you know I'm in trouble. I didn't need notes for this one. Exodus chapter 20. Ten Commandments. And you notice the Ten Commandments are divided. You got 4 and you got 6. The 4 deal directly with what? The vertical and the horizontal. Remember a few nights ago we talked about that. The vertical is the relationship that we have with Jesus. The horizontal is the relationship that we have with others. The first 4 commandments follow with that vertical relationship. And then the other 6 commandments deal with how we relate to each other. And God included the 4th commandment, the Sabbath, in the relational commandment in dealing with Him. Of course, there are things in there about what you should and should not do, and we should follow those the best we can, but it is still about the relationship with Him. And once that relationship is sure, once that relationship is solid, then the relationships that we have with everyone else just flow in a natural way. This commandment, the 4th commandment, is the only commandment that remembers, or excuse me, the only commandment that starts with the word remember. Why? That's a rhetorical question. Why? Why is that the only commandment that deals with remember? The first one doesn't say, remember, I'm the Lord your God. I have no other gods before me. Now remember that. Remember, don't carve any images. Remember, don't take the Lord's name in vain. No. But He does say, remember the Sabbath. Which means that it had to have been a part of a tradition long before He initiated it at Sinai. It wasn't new. He asked them, hey, listen, I'm your God, you know that. And that's a good thing. And I'm here for you. And if you keep me first and foremost in your life and not create any other idols, it's going to be a good thing for you. But please, 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 remember the 7th day and keep it holy. 6 days shalt thy labor and do all thy work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it, you need to rest in me and absorb as much of me as you possibly can. And if you're too busy working, or you're too busy watching other people work for you,